All right, Math 102, final exam review, starting with number 64, solving quadratic equations. So remember, to solve quadratic equations, you have a couple different choices. You can factor, you can use the square root property, you can complete the square, or you can use the quadratic equation. I always check to see if I can factor it first. And in order to factor it, in order to use the quadratic equation, you have to have it equal to 0. So that's going to be the start here. So 5x squared minus 3x minus 8 is equal to 0. And so when I'm looking for this, if I'm looking for factors of negative 40 that make negative 3, that's going to be a negative 8 and a positive 5. And so I could use the backward box method. I can do this one by trial and error, so it doesn't matter how you get to the correct factorization, but once you get to the correct factorization, it is going to be 5x minus 8 and x plus 1. And that equals 0. And so then we just double check it. 5x times x is 5x squared. The outer gives me 5x. The inner gives me negative 8x. That makes negative 3. And negative 8 times 1 is negative 8. So then once I get here, now I can set each of these factors equal to 0. And then I will solve. And so I'm going to add 8. So 5x equals 8. X is 8/5, or x is negative 1. And I believe they just write it as a set. You will have, your choices of what your two solutions are. Now, the next one is set up perfectly to use the square root property. So remember that the quadratic means that you have to have you will have at most two solutions. So when you are using the square root property, you have to remember when I take the square root of both sides, this cancels, and so I'm left with x plus 6. And that equals plus or minus the square root of 11. And a lot of you missed that on your last test. You only had plus square root of 11. So then once I get there, then I can subtract 6 from both sides, and that gives me x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 11. So if I were to write it out as two separate solutions, there would be my two solutions. Negative 6 plus square root of 11, negative 6 minus square root of 11. Now the next one, just to practice, let's go ahead and complete the square with that one. So I'm going to come over here and so I'm going to do u squared plus 18u plus blank equals negative 59 plus blank. Okay, so I had to move the 59 over. Now I'm going to take half of 18, which is 9, and square it, which is 81. And that goes in the two blanks. And then I will factor u squared plus 18u plus 81 is u plus 9, quantity squared, and 81 plus negative 59 is equal to 22. Now I can use the square root property. And so we get u plus 9 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 22. There are no perfect squares in square root of 22, so I simply move over the 9. And so u equals a negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 22. All right. So the next one, I think I can factor. So I'm going to come down here. I'm just going to running out of space here. 2x squared plus 3x plus 1 is equal to 0. I know the only way to make 2x and 2x squared is 2x times x, and the only way to make 1 is 1 and 1. And so when I FOIL that, that does work. And so now I set each of these up and solve. I'm going to subtract, so I get 2x equals -1. So x is -1/2, and x is -1. Okay. And in the last one, now this one is not going to factor. I'm not going to be able to find factors of -2 because I'm going to have to move that over that are going to make -5. So in this one, number 68, I am going to use the quadratic formula. So first I have to get everything to the left-hand side and equal it to 0. And so now I'm going to identify my A is 1, my B is -5, and my C is -2. So I've used the formula. X is the opposite of B, which is the opposite of -5 is +5, plus or minus the square root, B squared, which is 25, minus 4 times A times C, all over 2 times A. And so now that simplifies to 5 plus or minus 25 minus 4 times 1 times -2 is the same as 25 plus 8, which becomes the square root of 33 all over 2. And that's all I can do. Now the next one is set up for completing the square, and it's done nicely for number 69. We are just going to leave the -15 on that one side, and we're just going to create our blanks. So this is number 69, x squared plus 10x plus blank is equal to -15 plus blank. And I'm going to take half of 10, which is 5, and square it, which is 25, and those go in the blanks. Then I factor this group, and that's going to become x plus 5 squared. And then I simplify. -15 and +25 is +10. And then I take the square root. And so I get x plus 5 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 10. And last but not least, I subtract the 5 so that I get -5 plus or minus the square root of 10. And I'm going to stop there, and then we'll start graphing.